one of the best ways or God-given techniques to teach his word before his people is to bring the congregation into the Bible instead of bringing the Bible to the congregation. To truly grasp the Western Christian-style congregation and to get them to understand thoroughly what the Bible says about another sect of people, we must give them a biblical passport to travel across the Atlantic Ocean into a foreign land where a faith and religion had begun under hard and tough circumstances, under oppression and ridicule, living in a marginalized and abrasive environment. Something I've noticed in the ministry is that people like to draw a line between now and then, as though the biblical people are different from modern day people, as though the God of the Bible is different from the God of our current society. I hope no one in here tonight has that particular philosophy that God is different now than he was then. I hope no one says that and still quotes Hebrews 13 and 8 that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. Oh, I just hope on tonight that no one is here tonight that the problem in the situation that says that their problems in their situations are different and their problems were different from how we handle things now. I hope especially our black culture is, if anybody can relate to the biblical people, it should be us black people. If anybody can relate to what was going on, it would be our black brothers and our black sisters. To know what oppression feels like, to know what injustice feels like, to know what tyranny feels like, to know what disposition feels like, to be looked down upon. If anybody should know what it feels like to be made a public open lynching and execution like Jesus, it should be black people. It was not God's intention for you to draw the line and see the differences, but the Bible was wrote in order for you to see the similarities of a people who had the same situations and a God who kept them and a God that will keep us right now. The only thing that was different over there at that time than our time now is that religion was more dangerously and deadly and then the land of these so-called United States. So on tonight, it's my prayer that you understand and relate to how Paul was given a platform before his Jewish brethren, his prestigious men, and a political panel, and how he seized the moment to preach, proclaim, and persuade when he was given the opportunity. In this text, you have Paul, who has been requested to be heard by King Agrippa, who is King Herod's grandson. Y'all know the king who killed all the male children in the Gospel of Matthew who were under the age of 2 years old, attempting to kill baby Jesus. Festus, who was a Roman procurator, he was what we call a modern day citywide tax collector for the Romans. Not much is mentioned about Brother Festus here, except that in chapter 25, the chief priests and others were trying to get him to release Paul out of this prison and send him to Jerusalem, only to ambush Paul and kill him. They were attempting to bribe him because Festus was the new procurator and he really didn't know much about Paul. All Roman officer positions, watch this now, were placed in order that every city remained under control and ran smoothly. Festus has been in office for more than a week, and yet he runs into a situation in Jerusalem, and he's already faced with issues that the people want him to fix. And guess what was on top of his agenda? Paul. Yeah, you know the text doesn't give much attention to Festus' life. But if you ever been in a new position or been placed or elected for an office, why is it, I just got a question, Pastor Thompson, why is it that the first thing they want you to tackle is the troubles that they assume is troubles? You get elected to pastor, and the first thing they want you to do is point out all the bad members. You get hired as a GM, and the first thing they want you to do is fire all the bad employees, and they are the ones who are really doing all the work. President Obama got elected, and the first paper wrote Galilee, who was face to face with Jesus before his crucifixion, desired to see a sign, but when Jesus didn't give him a sign, he mocked him and sent him back to Pilate. Even though he mocked him, he found no fault in Jesus. His father, King Herod the Great, who was also fascinated with the wise men came looking for baby Jesus in Jerusalem, and he desired as well to see the child, but only to kill him. This is why Paul says in verse 2, I am fortunate and glad that I have the opportunity to present my case, to plead my cause, to preach Jesus to you, Agrippa, because you, out of all people, because like your daddy and like your granddaddy, all of y'all desire to know a little bit about my Jesus. He says, I'm honored to plead my case before you because you, of all people, are familiar with our customs and our controversies as Jewish people. It's interesting because people have always been fascinated with the story of Jesus and how he changed somebody's life. But the trick part of this is, watching this carefully now, your story is only interesting if you're living out what you're professing. I'm going to say it one more time. Your story is only interesting if you're living out what you're professing. They would have never bothered Paul if he wasn't changed and living a different life. If he was doing what everybody else was doing, he was all right. If he was out doing what everybody else was doing, he wasn't nobody would have bothered Paul. Your story is only interesting if you're only living out what you're professing. Don't nobody want to hear about your change if they don't see a change. Don't nobody want to hear about your change if they don't see a change in you. The Bible says, therefore, any man be in Christ, all things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. So Paul gives his testimony, right? How he was trained up in the Jewish law, how he put Christians in prison, how he voted against them to be put to death, how he punished them and persecuted them towards the other cities. He even gives his Damascus Road experience. He even goes so far to tell King Agrippa it was about 12 o'clock in the midday when Jesus revealed himself to me, knocked me off my horse, and me and my men all fell to the floor. I saw a light come down from heaven, and this is what happened to me. And he gave me my great commission to preach the gospel. And the text says, as he was still preaching, giving his testimony, Festus said, Paul, all this Jesus stuff has driven you crazy. Paul says, I'm not crazy at all. I'm just simply speaking the truth. Something I've noticed when speaking to unbelievers, they have a habit of swaying their head east and west. While I'm not in my head north and south. They are in unbelief about your testimony of Christ. But something I've noticed from my pastoral and ministerial friends, sometimes preachers, we can make believing in Jesus a little bit difficult. By our fancy words and our diplomas and degrees and education and philosophies and theologies and ideologies, that we lose somebody in the midst of trying to save somebody. Paul told the Thessalonians church, and my speech and my preaching that govern our country. We live in a free country, and the church is silent on injustice matters. We live in a free country, and we have a free voice, but the church, the preachers, never cease to seize the moment when somebody needs to be spoken to. You have to seize the moment to preach the good news to every available ear. Simply saying Jesus came, Jesus lived, Jesus died, and he is risen. Oh, as Agrippa was listening, I can see him sitting on the edge of his seat, enjoying the good message that Paul was preaching. Everybody else around him is quiet. He's in an open atmosphere, so everybody, all eyes are on Paul. He got up and he said, Paul, you almost persuaded me to be a Christian. He said, Paul, in other words, you almost got me with this Jesus thing. Oh, I know my granddaddy and them and my dad and them, they heard about Jesus. Well, Paul, I want to tell you, you almost got me with this good news. In other words, he said, if it wasn't for all these people around Paul, it was just me and you. You might want to have an extra church member. You might want to just have an extra preacher in your pulpit. If it wasn't for all these people around influencing my political strain, Paul, you might just have a new convert. If Agrippa was here, I would continue Paul's sermon and tell him almost isn't good enough. Oh, if King was in the congregation on tonight, I would tell him almost isn't good enough. Almost isn't going to get you into those gates. Almost ain't going to change your life. You got to be fully persuaded, knowing that Christ is the Son of God, and Christ came down to save the sins of the world. And you got to be fully persuaded, because almost isn't good enough. Wonder why there's so many problems within the church. Because we have almost preachers, almost deacons, almost mothers, almost pastors, almost church congregations. Ain't nobody trying to be fully persuaded, living fully converted and fully saved in this generation now. You have to seize the moment, because almost isn't good enough. It wasn't that Paul's preaching was not good enough either. Paul had preached many good Jesus sermons. But see, sometimes what I learned from Agrippa was that we sometimes allow people to influence our conditions. We don't do out of, even though we might believe, even though we might almost be there, we simply don't do because of what somebody else don't think or say about us. We just simply stay at the almost line. God's calling for everybody to be saved. God said it's my desire that everyone come into salvation. But you know, there's always going to be some almost people somewhere in this land. You have to learn how to cease the moment. Ceasing the moment requires inward persuasion. Sometimes people don't get saved off of what you say simply because you're not fully persuaded in what you say you believe. You can't persuade nobody if yourself isn't already fully persuaded. You're giving them almost gospel. You're not giving them all the gospel. You have to be fully persuaded when you cease in the moment. Oh, how I love the biblical characters. I can just see Paul with a smile upon his face, all chained up, dirty robe on, no shoes, probably ain't been washed to touch water in days, and bathed in months, so the chains are running through his flesh, blood running all down his body, eyes are bulging because they probably ain't fed Paul in a while, but he's still preaching the gospel. He's still seizing the moment to try to save one more body. I can just see the discipline in Paul's faith as he stood before that political panel and told what he believed and what he stood on. Always remember, seize the moment when the opportunity is given. Seize the platform. Take advantage of the platform. Take advantage of oppression. Take advantage of injustice ways to have your voice be heard. We live in this. It's a shame that we live in a country and nobody want to speak about nothing. It's okay. You look at the story in the life of Jesus. He was always into some political mess.
Yeah.
He seized the moment at 12 years old to tell somebody the truth about righteousness. Can't nobody get saved if you silent. God bless you.